They say the bond among a mother and son is unbreakable, but ours felt different. We shared moments that appeared special until the day I whispered, "Hurry up. Your dad shouldn't see this." Suddenly, the whole lot modified. What becomes speculated to be innocent now felt like something I wasn't geared up to confront. All of it started on a normal Saturday afternoon. Ethan had stepped out to run errands, leaving me alone with Adrian. Commonly, our weekends had been like some other, me taking care of factors across the house, him on his PC misplaced in his own international. However, nowadays became distinct. We had been sitting together within the dwelling room. A rare second of calm in the house. The TV become on, but I wasn't really watching it. My phone become in my hand. However, I wasn't searching at that either. I ought to feel his eyes on me, and I wasn't positive what to do with that. I glanced at Adrian from the nook of my eye, trying to ignore the uncomfortable tension within the air. "What is up? Why are you staring at me like that?" I requested, my voice popping out extra strained than I meant it to be. It became presupposed to sound casual, however it didn't. The silence among us felt too thick, too loaded with something I could not define. He did not answer in the beginning. He just saved staring, his gaze almost too severe for comfort. "You stunning, mother," he said quietly, his voice catching my interest more than the words themselves. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that, but these days, it felt distinct, like the phrases had more weight to them. I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't sure the way to reply nicely, "Thank you." I trailed off, searching away. However, Adrian didn't let it pass. He leaned ahead barely, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "It is no longer just that," he said, his eyes locked onto mine, searching. "There is something among us now. Can't you sense it?" I iced up the words, felt like a punch to the gut. Something between us. What become he speaking approximately? I couldn't discern out why. However, the room abruptly felt smaller, greater, suffocating. My throat went dry, and I attempted to pressure out a reaction. However, not anything got here. "Do you know what you mean?" I, in the end, managed to say, my voice shaky, uncertain. I did not need to stand something it turned into, he become alluding to, and failed to want to renounce the atypical pull in my stomach that have been growing ever in view that he'd started looking at me that manner. My mind raced, looking to make sense of it, but not anything appeared to healthy. Adrian failed to communicate again. He just saved looking at me, his expression unreadable, and for the primary time, I felt like I did not recognize my personal son. Something changed into occurring among us, something I could not explain. It became like an invisible barrier had formed, and I had no idea how to interrupt it down. He shifted closer to me on the couch, and all of a sudden, the space among us felt a whole lot too small. His eyes have been locked on mine, searching as if he had been seeking to examine something deep internal me. "Don't you?" he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You felt it too, have not you?" Something's modified. My breath stuck in my throat, and for a moment I could not flow. I could not even think what become he announcing, what become he implying. My mind raced, but I couldn't make feel of it. All I knew changed into that I felt trapped through his phrases, his gaze, the intensity of his presence. I started out, but my voice faltered. "What are you trying to say?" He failed to solution right away. Alternatively, he reached out and positioned his hand on mine lightly, nearly tenderly. The touch dispatched a jolt of energy through me, my pores and skin tingling where his fingers rested. I pulled, my hand returned instinctively. However, the feeling lingered like a spark that refused to die. "You realize what I'm saying?" he whispered, his eyes never leaving mine. "We don't must foe anymore." My stomach churned, a wave of confusion and worry crashing over me. "Pretend?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. "Pretend what?" Adrian leaned in closer, and abruptly the air among us was charged with something dangerous, something I didn't understand, however, couldn't forget about, that there isn't always something among us, he stated softly, his voice so low, It sent shivers down my spine, something we both sense. I stared at him, my mind spinning, my frame frozen in region. This wasn't occurring. This could not be taking place. But the manner he became looking at me, the way his words wrapped round me like a vice advised me, in any other case I don't. I do not know what you are talking about, I stammered, trying to shy away, seeking to break out the developing tension that turned into suffocating me. However, he didn't back off. He moved even closer, his hand brushing against mine again, and this time I failed to shy away. I could not. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by way of the depth of the instant. Sure you do, he whispered, his voice like a darkish secret being found out. You've felt it too, have not you? My heart pounded in my chest, my pulse racing. I did not understand what to say, how to respond. The whole thing about this changed into wrong. However, at the equal time, there has been something approximately it that I couldn't forget about. Something that had been simmering underneath the surface for a long time. Something I hadn't desired to acknowledge. Adrian, I started out, my voice trembling. However, I did not realize how to complete the sentence. What changed into, I suppose to mention. How may want to, I even begin to method what became taking place. He didn't give me a hazard to discern it out. Before I may want to react, he leaned in last, the small distance between us, his lips brushing in opposition to mine in a soft, hesitant kiss. The surprise of it jolted through me, my thoughts going blank, my frame stiffening in response. However then, something passed off that I hadn't anticipated, something I couldn't provide an explanation for. Instead of pulling away rather than screaming or jogging or pushing him off, I found myself kissing him back. It was as though my frame had a thoughts of its personal, responding to a preference I didn't even recognize turned into there. The kiss deepened, and for a moment the sector around us disappeared. There was no right or incorrect, no beyond or future, simply the two of us stuck in a moment we could not take lower back. However then, simply as because it had commenced, I pulled away, my coronary heart pounding, my thoughts reeling. What are we doing? I gasped, my voice shaking with a mix of worry and disbelief. Adrian looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't call, something darkish and extreme and plain. We don't ought to forestall, he stated softly, his palms nevertheless resting on mine. No person has to understand. My belly twisted in knots, my mind racing. As I attempted to make feel of what had simply passed off, this turned into incorrect. It had to be incorrect, but at the equal time, there was part of me deep down, hidden within the shadows that did not need it to prevent. That desired greater. No, I whispered, shaking my head, seeking to clean the fog that had settled over my mind. This isn't always proper. We cannot do this. Didn't pass, didn't returned away. His eyes stayed locked on mine, filled with a determined depth that scared me extra than whatever else. Why not? He asked, his voice calm, nearly soothing. We are each adults. We don't need to follow all and sundry else's guidelines. The words hung inside the air, wrapping round me like a vice, tightening with every passing twand. My mind screamed that this changed into wrong, that I needed to get out of there. However, my body wasn't listening. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and I failed to understand what to do. This was my son. This couldn't be happening, but it became, and part of me failed to want it to forestall. But the story did not quit there, just because the weight of the whole thing threatened to suffocate me. I heard the sound of an automobile pulling into the driveway. My breath hitched, and I jumped to my toes, my coronary heart racing even quicker. My husband turned into domestic. The sound of the car in the driveway broke the spell that had settled over the room. My coronary heart pounded in my chest, the reality of the situation crashing down on me like a wave. I jumped up, transferring far away from Adrian, my pulse racing. Because the front door creaked open, Ethan's voice floated in from the hallway, cheerful and oblivious. I'm again, she referred to as out her footsteps approaching the living room. I'm hoping you failed to get bored while I used to be long past. I swallowed hard, my frame still trembling from what had. My stomach in knots as I prevented searching at my son. But now and again, I might capture his eyes on me, a spark of something darkish and dangerous flickering at the back of them. It became diffused, hidden underneath the facade of normalcy. However, it turned into a reminder of what had passed off and what should occur again. And that's what scared me the most, the possibility that it happened once more. My heart pounded in my chest, my pulse racing. I failed to understand what to say, the way to reply. The entirety about this was wrong. However, at the equal time, there was something about it that I could not ignore. Something that had been simmering beneath the floor for a long term. Something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Adrian, I started out, my voice trembling. However, I failed to know how to finish the sentence. What became I meant to say? How should I even begin to procedure what changed into going on? He did not supply me a danger to figure it out. Before I should react, he leaned in, final the small distance between us, his lips brushing in opposition to mine in a soft, hesitant kiss. The shock of it jolted via me, my thoughts going blank, my frame stiffening in reaction. But then something occurred that I hadn't expected, something I could not give an explanation for. In place of pulling away, rather than screaming, or walking, or pushing him off, I discovered myself kissing him back. It became as though my body had thoughts of its own, responding to a choice I did not even realize turned into there. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, the arena around us disappeared. There has been no proper or wrong, no past or destiny, simply the two folks stuck in a moment we could not take lower back. But then, simply as unexpectedly as it had began, I pulled away, my coronary heart pounding, my mind reeling. What are we doing? I gasped, my voice shaking with a mix of worry and disbelief. Adrian checked out me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name, something dark and excessive and undeniable. We don't have to forestall, he said softly, his palms nonetheless resting on mine. Nobody has to realize. My belly twisted in knots, my mind racing. As I tried to make feel of what had just passed off, this turned into wrong. It had to be wrong. But on the equal time, there was part of me deep down, hidden inside the shadows, that didn't want it to prevent, that desired more. No, I whispered, shaking my head, trying to clean the fog that had settled over my mind. This isn't always proper. We can't do this. He did not pass, didn't return away. His eyes stayed locked on mine, packed with a desperate intensity that scared me more than anything else. Why no longer? He requested, his voice calm, nearly soothing. We're each adults. We do not ought to follow everybody else's rules. The phrases hung within the air, wrapping around me like a vice, tightening with every passing twand. My thoughts screamed that this became wrong, that I had to get out of there. But my frame, my body wasn't listening. My coronary heart changed into pounding, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and that I did not know what to do. This became my son. This could not be going on, but it turned into, and part of me failed to need it to forestall. However, the tale did not give up there, simply as the weight of the entirety threatened to suffocate me. I heard the sound of an automobile pulling into the driveway. My breath hitched and I jumped to my toes, my coronary heart racing even faster. My husband changed into domestic. The sound of the automobile within the driveway broke the spell that had settled over the room. My heart pounded in my chest, the truth of the state of affairs crashing down on me like a wave. I jumped up, moving far away from Adrian, my pulse racing. As the front door creaked open, Ethan's voice floated in from the hallway, joyful and oblivious. "I am lower back," she known as out her footsteps coming near the dwelling room. "I am hoping you two didn't become bored at the same time as I used to be long past." I swallowed hard, my body still trembling from what had just came about. Adrian remained seated, his eyes locked on me. However, there was a one-of-a-kind appearance on his face. Now something calculating, like he turned into already considering a way to keep our secret hidden. I couldn't have a look at him, couldn't face the fact of what we had accomplished, so I compelled a grin and moved quickly to the kitchen. "Hello, Ethan," I called out, retaining my voice as mild as I could, despite the fact that I felt like I was going to be ill, simply getting performed with some vital stuff around the house. I heard him chuckle, the sound so ordinary, so innocent, that it made my belly turn with guilt. "I were given all of the stuff for dinner, so why do not you set the table, honey?" My arms were shaking as I opened the cupboard and grabbed the plates, the easy assignment feeling monumental. In that moment, I may want to sense Adrian's presence inside the living room, his eyes nonetheless on me, watching my each circulate. It felt just like the partitions had been final in on me, like I was trapped in a nightmare that I could not break out from. Dinner that nighttime became agonizing. Ethan chatted away, absolutely unaware of the tension simmering just below the surface. I barely touched my food, my stomach in knots as I averted searching at my son. But on occasion, I might seize his eyes on me, a spark of something darkish and dangerous flickering at the back of them. It turned into subtle, hidden underneath the facade of normalcy. However, it turned into a reminder of what had happened and what ought to show up again. And that is what scared me the most, the opportunity that it would manifest again. I spent the next few days averting him as a great deal as I ought to, locating any excuse to be out of the house or locked away in my room. However, the anxiety did not depart. It only grew more potent with every passing moment. Each time I saw him, even from a distance, I should sense the pull between us, like gravity drawing us together. It was incorrect. It turned into twisted. However, it became plain. Then came the nighttime, while the whole thing changed. Ethan had every other work journey a weekend away. At a few event, he was organizing, and I knew that intended I'd be on my own, inside the house with Adrian. The thought made my heart race with both worry and something else, something I failed to need to renounce. I attempted to make plans to live at a pal's area, but nothing worked out, and I discovered myself trapped, unable to get away. The inevitable Friday nighttime after my husband had left the residence felt too quiet, too still. I stayed in my room for as long as I could, pretending to look at, but the silence turned into suffocating. Subsequently, my stomach compelled me to venture downstairs for meals. Adrian was inside the kitchen after I were given there, leaning against the counter with a lager in hand. He looked up once I walked in, his eyes assembly mine, and for a second neither of us stated something. The tension among us changed into palpable, thick in the air, and my heart pounded in my chest as I moved to the fridge. "Pretending no longer to know you've been averting me," he said, his voice low however regular. I froze, my hand hovering over the fridge door. I did not recognize the way to reply, did not even understand if I should reply. My throat was dry, my thoughts spinning. As I attempted to discover the right words, "I've simply been busy." I stated, my voice barely above a whisper. My lower back nevertheless turned to him, busy fending off me. He pressed his tone darker, now extra insistent. I swallowed difficult and became to face him, my stomach churning. We want to forget about what took place, I stated, my voice shaking. It was a mistake. It might not show up once more. However, he failed to seem like he agreed. He set his beer down on the counter and stepped closer, his eyes in no way leaving mine. It wasn't a mistake, he stated softly, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. You felt it too, don't lie to yourself. My pulse quickened, and I took a step returned. But he observed, ultimate the gap among us. Adrian, for God's sake, we cannot try this. I'm your mom, why now not? He requested, his voice low and nearly gentle. Nobody has to realize, and what in case you are my mom? It's just us. We're each adults. His words wrapped round me like a snake, tightening with each syllable. I shook my head, looking to resist. However, there was something in his eyes, something that made it not possible to look away. This is incorrect. I am your mom, and that's the truth, I whispered, my voice trembling. Is it? He asked, his hand accomplishing out to comb against my arm. The touch dispatched a shock of power through me, my frame betraying me once more. Or are we just afraid of what human beings will suppose? I desired to scream, to push him away, to run as away as I could, but I failed to. I stood there, frozen as he stepped even closer. His breath warmed towards my pores and skin. We do not need to observe everyone's policies, but our personal, he whispered, his lips dangerously close to mine. And then, earlier than I could prevent him, he kissed me once more. This time, it wasn't hesitant, it wasn't soft, it became complete, of starvation, of want, and that I felt myself being pulled into it, the last shreds of my resistance crumbling away. His palms slid up, my hands pulling me nearer, and before I knew it, I used to be kissing him again, my frame betraying every rational idea in my head. The kiss deepened, and that I felt his palms on my waist pulling me in opposition to him. My mind screamed at me to forestall, to run, but my body had thoughts of its own, and that I could not turn away. I failed to want to shrink back. The warmth among us turned into intoxicating, overwhelming, and I couldn't suppose directly. Earlier than I knew it, we were moving, stumbling closer to the sofa, palms greedy, clothes shifting. My heart became racing, my breath coming in brief, frantic gasps, but I couldn't forestall. I did not want to stop. His hands had been everywhere on my chest, my hips, and the greater he touched me, the greater I wanted it became wrong. It became twisted. However, it became occurring, and I was powerless to prevent it. We fell onto the couch, and the following few moments had been a blur of heated kisses and desperate touches. I used to be misplaced inside the second misplaced in him, and earlier than I knew it, we have been crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The sector regarded to spin around me as our bodies moved collectively, and for a second, not anything else existed. However, us, the tension, the worry, the guilt, all of it dwindled away, replaced by means of something darker, something I couldn't call but did not need to let pass of, after which it was over. We lay there tangled collectively at the sofa, the weight of what we had simply done, pressing down on me like a 1,000 bricks. My heart became nonetheless racing, my breath nevertheless coming in ragged gasps. However, reality became already creeping lower back inside the guilt, the disgrace, the horror of what we had done. I pulled far away from him, my palms shaking, as I sat up, my thoughts reeling. Thesis turned into a mistake. I whispered, my voice hoarse. He simply lay there, his chest growing and falling as he caught his breath. When he subsequently spoke, his voice was calm, almost soothing. It would not should be. I stood up, shaking my head. It became a mistake. I stated, my voice stronger now. However, my coronary heart nevertheless pounding with fear and confusion. We cannot preserve doing this. It's wrong. However, Adrian wasn't listening. He sat up, his eyes on me, and for the primary time, I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. A darkness, a hunger that hadn't been there earlier then, and that I knew deep down that this changed into a long way from over. The tension within the house had been insufferable for days. I stayed locked in my room, seeking to cognizance on however the weight of what had happened among us. But no matter how hard I attempted, I couldn't forget about. On every occasion I closed my eyes, I could feel his touch, his breath, his lips on mine. The reminiscence clung to me like a shadow, refusing to allow pass. Idea if I prevented him long sufficient, matters might return to regular. However, deep down, I knew that wasn't feasible. We had crossed a line we could not uncross, and now it was handiest account of time earlier than the whole thing got here, crashing down. It turned into Saturday evening, while the knock on my door came. My coronary heart leapt into my throat, my body freezing in vicinity. I knew it became him. I may want to sense it in the pit of my belly. The identical pull that had been drawing us collectively, ever considering that first nighttime at the couch. "Can I are available?" Adrian's voice was soft, hesitant. However, there was something underneath it, something darker, greater, insistent. I swallowed, difficult, gazing the door, my thoughts racing. I need to say no. I must inform him to leave, to never come near me once more. But I did not. As a substitute, my frame acted on its personal, and I found myself whispering, "Yeah." The door creaked open and he stepped internal, his eyes locking onto mine the instant he entered the room. The tension between us became palpable, thick within the air, and I could experience my heart racing, my pulse quickening. I tried to look away to awareness on something, anything aside from him. However, it became not possible. He had this pull over me, this strength that I could not face up to. He moved nearer, his hand gently brushing against my arm. The contact sent a shiver down my spine, my frame reacting. Before I could prevent it, I flinched. However, I did not circulate away. I could not. "We don't have to combat this," he whispered, his voice gentle, nearly soft. "I realize you feel it too." My breath hitched, my pulse racing as his hand slid up, my arm resting on my shoulder. I desired to turn away. However, my frame wasn't listening. Alternatively, I found myself leaning into his touch, the warm temperature of his hand sending sparks through me. "Adrian," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We cannot." However, he wasn't listening. He stepped nearer again, his face inches from mine, his breath heat towards my skin. "No person has to recognize," he murmured, his lips brushing towards my ear. "It may simply be us earlier than I ought to say whatever." Before I may want to stop him, his lips were on mine once more. This time the kiss turned into exclusive, warmer, greater. However, I could not stop. I didn't need to stop. The heat among us became intoxicating, overwhelming, and I found myself lost in it, lost in him. His palms moved underneath my blouse, his fingers grazing my pores and skin, and I gasped towards his lips, my frame arching into him. I knew we were crossing a line that would in no way be uncrossed, but at that moment I didn't care. All I may want to consider became him, his contact, his breath, the way his frame pressed in opposition to mine. I gasped as he kissed his manner down my neck, his hands exploring every inch of my body. My mind was spinning, my heart racing. However, I couldn't prevent. I did not want to prevent. The next moments had been a blur, a whirlwind of kisses, touches, and gasps of delight. We moved together, our bodies fitting perfectly, as if this changed into something we were constantly supposed to do. The tension among us snapped, giving manner to something darker, something deeper. and I used to be misplaced in it, misplaced in him. And whilst it changed into over the weight of what we had completed, got here crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I lay there, my breath nonetheless coming in ragged gasp, my heart pounding in my chest, and for a second I could not move. I could not think. All I could do was feel the lingering warmth of his body towards mine, the manner his hand rested on my waist, the manner my body nonetheless trembled with the aftershocks of what we had simply finished. However, as the haze of preference commenced to fade, the guilt set in the disgrace, the horror of what we had completed. I pulled far from him, sitting up on the threshold of the mattress, my fingers shaking thesis become a mistake. I whispered, my voice trembling. Adrian sat up at the back of me, his hand lightly resting on my returned. It would not need to be, he said softly, his voice calm, almost soothing. I shook my head, my belly churning with guilt. We can't preserve doing this, I said, my voice slightly above a whisper. It is wrong. He didn't say something for a moment, then he reached for my hand, his grip mild however firm. No person has to understand. He repeated, his voice low. This can be our mystery. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. It's no longer about anyone understanding. I stated, my voice stronger. Now it's approximately what we've accomplished. I cannot try this anymore. He watched me, his eyes darkish, and for a moment, I notioned he would possibly argue. But then he nodded, his expression unreadable. If that is what you want, he said quietly. I became and walked out of the room, my coronary heart pounding, my thoughts spinning with the whole lot that had just happened. But as I closed the door at the back of me, I knew this wasn't the stop. It wasn't over. It changed into just the start of something darker, something I couldn't get away. The silence within the house had grown insufferable, like a heavy blanket, suffocating me with every passing day. My husband, blissfully ignorant of the chaos swirling below the surface, moved around as though nothing had modified. However, for me, the entirety became unique each moment I was close to. My son changed into thick with tension, the air between us buzzing with something dangerous. I prevented him as lots as I should. However, the extra I tried to break out, the extra I felt the pull between us intensify. I knew I could not maintain this up for all time. There has been a breaking point, and I should experience it approaching. It turned into some other Friday night time, and once again, Ethan had plans to be out late with her pals. I might acknowledge at the present time was coming, tried to put together myself for it, but because the evening wore on, I felt the acquainted knot in my belly, tighten the house regarded too quiet too. Nonetheless, as if it became looking ahead to something to occur, and I was too. I stayed in my room pretending to work, but my thoughts stored drifting, my thoughts swirling with the memory of what had took place among us. It performed over and over again, each time feeling extra actual, extra excessive. I wanted to hate him for it to hate myself, but the reality turned into greater complicated than that. There has been a part of me, a part I did not want to confess, existed that could not forestall thinking about it, approximately him. By the point Ethan left, my heart became pounding in my chest, the silence of the residence pressing in on me. I paced the duration of my room, my thoughts, a mess of confusion and choice. I failed to want to face him, failed to want to danger falling into that identical trap again. However, I should experience it constructing the anxiety, the pull. It changed into like gravity dragging me down, pulling me nearer, regardless of how difficult I attempted to resist. And then without questioning, I found myself heading downstairs. The moment my toes hit the last step, I saw him. He was sitting inside the living room, gazing the TV, but I knew he wasn't honestly watching it. He hadn't grew to become his head. However, I ought to feel his attention shift. The second one I entered the room, the burden of his gaze changed into on me, even supposing he wasn't looking without delay at me yet. My throat tightened, and for a short moment I considered turning round, jogging back upstairs. However, something held me there, rooted in area, Can't sleep. His voice turned into low, clean, but there has been something under it, something that made my pulse quicken. I hesitated, my thoughts racing with excuses. However, none of them felt proper. I simply needed a few air. I mumbled, no longer knowing what else to say. It wasn't absolutely a lie. The air in my room had felt too thick, too stifling. He nodded slowly, as though he understood, and then in the end became his head to observe me. His eyes were darkish, extreme, and the instant our gazes met, I felt that same energy run via me. My heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. I ought to have left. Then I ought to have turned round and walked back upstairs, but I did not. I stood there, frozen, looking forward to what would appear subsequent. I felt my stomach twist at his phrases. He wasn't going to let this cross. A part of me knew that deep down, but listening to him say it out loud made the whole thing sense more actual, greater risky. I do not know what to do, I said. Subsequently, the fact spilling out earlier than I should stop it. The whole lot's just messed up. He shifted at the couch, moving a bit nearer, but now not too close. We are able to determine it out, he stated, softly, collectively. Those words hit me like a punch to the intestine. I wanted to consider him, wanted to think that some way we could make this paintings, but I knew it wasn't that easy. Not anything approximately this became simple. This is wrong, I stated, my voice trembling. You already know it is. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached out his hand, brushing gently against mine. The touch sent a shiver down my spine. My frame, reacting before I could suppose I ought to have pulled away, ought to have advised him to prevent, but I did not. I just sat there, letting his arms linger on mine, feeling the heat of his skin in opposition to mine. Perhaps, he stated quietly, his eyes locked on mine. However, that doesn't change how we feel. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him that we could not preserve doing this. However, the words would not come. My coronary heart turned into pounding in my chest, my pulse racing in my ears, and all I may want to reflect on, consideration on, changed into the way his hand felt on mine. The manner my frame appeared to betray me. Whenever he touched me, we tumbled onto the sofa, our bodies tangled collectively in a multitude of preference and guilt, and earlier than I knew it, we had crossed the line once more, crossed it in a manner that felt impossible to come lower back from when it turned into over. We lay there breathless, the burden of what we'd accomplished, urgent down on me like a ton of bricks. I could not move, couldn't suppose, couldn't even breathe properly. I felt him beside me, his hand, nevertheless, resting on my waist, and I knew I had to say something. I had to make this prevent. However, the phrases would not come. Instead, I slowly sat up, pulling far from him, my heart still racing. I can't preserve doing this, I whispered, extra to myself than to him. He sat up too, his eyes on me. However, he didn't say whatever. He did not try to stop me as I stood, didn't attain out to tug me back for the primary time. I felt like maybe he understood, that perhaps, just perhaps, he knew this couldn't cross on. I did not look again as I walked away, my FT sporting me up the stairs and back to the safety of my room. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it as the total weight of the whole thing got here crashing down on me. I didn't recognize how I used to be going to face him tomorrow. I sat on the threshold of my mattress watching the door, my coronary heart, nonetheless, racing from the entirety that had came about. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my fingers around them, seeking to calm the hurricane inner me. However, irrespective of how tightly I held on, I could not shake the sensation that gnawed at me, the sinking recognition that notwithstanding the whole lot, this wasn't the stop. Due to the fact deep down, I knew that on foot away tonight did not imply I had escaped. This became far from over.